Good afternoon, KIPI listeners. This is Missouri Breaks, doing our weekly show where we focus on a variety of public health topics. And this show, we're going to be focusing on grief and dealing with grief. This is Rae O'Leary with Missouri Breaks. I'm an assistant director there, and I will be joined by Michelle West. Michelle, can you introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, for sure. First of all, thank you guys for having me here today. I'm gonna introduce myself according to my cultural protocol, if that's okay. Ahamatakiapi, chante oshtanapachi uzapi, chante tizamani wihemia namasha west amachiapi. My name is Michelle West. My Lakota name is She Walks with a Strong Heart, and I am the program director for Wakbawashte Counseling Services. So I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today.
Absolutely. And I just thought it was such a cool idea to talk about grief because there's not anyone that gets out of this life without experiencing grief in some way, shape,
Mm-hmm.
or form. And I really loved the title that you came up with for the program today, which is Good Grief. And it's kind of an abstract thing. Like, what does that even look like? Like, is that possible to have good grief? But I'm hopeful by the end of the program today that people can maybe think about it a little bit differently and think about how they've gone through grief and maybe try something new that can make that experience more positive for them or maybe less painful for them.
Mhm.
So I guess to start, what is grief?
Well, I guess when I came up with the title "Good Grief," I was actually kind of what came to mind was a certain treatment group that we used to use back in the day when I worked as a counselor trainee. When we would work with clients dealing with the topic of grief and the stages that accompany that process. And we called that session Good Grief. And just because it talked about all the different aspects of grief and an appropriate grieving process, if there is such a thing as an appropriate grieving process. But, grief can be seen as different things. People think of grief and right away they think of death and the
Hmm.
loss of a loved one.
Hmm.
And I think it just because of our community, in our community we experience so many funerals. We see that
Hmm.
all the time. There's wakes and funerals constantly, but grief can be just the loss of something. Period. A divorce, a separation, having your leg amputated.
Hmm.
Things like that is still a certain grieving process that you go through that we experience.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And I will share a little bit about myself, but I had kind of a challenging birth for my first child. And I was really into all the birth plans and the things that I wanted, and it didn't at all go as planned. And I, looking back, identify that I went through a grieving process of I didn't get the experience that I wanted. And, my baby turned out okay, even though it was really scary and challenging. But yeah, there was a certain level of grief of I didn't get the experience that I had envisioned that I went through. So that's a really good point that it's not just death, which is often what we think about when it comes to
Hmm.
grief. Um, so as you talked a little bit about the different sources of grief, what would you say are some of the signs and symptoms of grief that people might recognize?
I think speaking from my own personal experience, which is probably all I can speak from, is probably just the sadness of it,
Mm-hmm.
the I guess feeling it is experiencing the sadness, the loneliness, the um, trying to, um, I guess, express to people and get people to understand how you're feeling and how you're experiencing that. And, but looking at somebody who's going through that, those aren't always things that are easily identified because they come off differently. They can
Totally.
come out as people being angry, lashing out, withdrawing. And again, unfortunately, for some, turning to substances, things like that. Suicidal ideations, attempts. There's just such a wide array of different types of characteristics and symptoms that accompany that grieving
Hmm.
process.
So it sounds like kind of just a change from baseline. Like maybe if
Right.
you think about, who you are today or, your loved ones, who they are last week, was there a big change in that after an experience that could be
Mhm.
considered grief? Hmm. Interesting. And as far as the grieving process, you mentioned that a little bit. I mean, I think when it comes to grief, that's all I know is like that there's stages and we go through them differently. Some people might not go through them all. Some people do them in different orders. So what can you share with listeners about the grieving process?
Well, there were some things that I had pulled up prior to this, is just because I was trying to refresh myself on some things. But I know that, like, when you learn about grief, or when, going to school and stuff, learning about the process of grief and things like that, you have that mainstream model of the different stages. There's like 5 stages or 7 stages. But if you're looking at it through that aspect, it's basically going through the initial shock of experiencing that loss, a denial stage where you're in denial, and usually that comes immediately with whatever type of a grief experience that is, anger, about kind of bargaining stage of trying to process a way out of having to feel or experiencing
Mm-hmm.
that, a depression stage, and then, which is probably the physical grieving, crying, sadness, all of that. And then there was a stage called a testing stage, where you're trying to look at trying to seek realistic solutions to your grieving process.
So like
And
testing out different methods to work through it. Is that what
right,
that means? Okay.
right. And then finding a way to keep on going, which they refer to as like the acceptance stage. And when we used to do this good grief model that we used to demonstrate for clients back in the day, we kind of or formed it like the medicine wheel, the circle with the
Yeah.
4 areas, and moving in that circular for the clockwise format of that was that first stage was that denial stage.
Hmm.
Then you move into the anger, depression, and then the acceptance stage. And they modeled that in a way as like in Lakota culture, you move clockwise through things,
Mm-hmm.
and that a healthy form of experiencing and moving through the grieving process was moving through it that way. Through, you're going to go through this denial stage, you're going to go through experiencing the anger of acknowledging that this loss has happened, and then the depression sets in, where you're grieving and crying, and then you start transitioning into the acceptance part of it, where your life is never going to be the same again.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be forever impacted by it, but you start looking at a different way of how you can start moving through life, and living life with having that experience of
Mm-hmm.
grief or loss.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. So, I mean, I think it sounds like there's similarities between the
Yeah.
more like westernized, 5 stages or 7 stages that people are familiar with,
Mhm.
and then also more of a Lakota point of view of how that looks. And I like the idea of good grief, meaning that the end is acceptance. That
Right.
that's a really hard point to get to for a lot of people, but it gives us maybe some hope to look forward to, that there will be a stage where, like you said, you'll never be the same again, but you can maybe find a way to continue moving forward in your life.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the points we used to try to make too with the clients was that, when you're in addiction, or you are have experienced certain traumatic experiences in your lives, that there's a dysfunctional process that happens with the grieving process,
Hmm.
in which, rather than you moving through that clockwise model of experiencing grief, we're all over with it, where we
Hmm.
can jump around. One day we're in denial, then we're over here crying, and then you're angry one day, and then one day you're okay, but then next week you're just lashing
Back
out,
into it.
and you're
Hmm.
just all around with it. And how do we identify that, and get ourselves the help that we need to start moving through that process in a more healthy manner?
Hmm. So that kind of brings me to the next question on
Hmm.
dealing with grief. So I'm hearing so far that there's a good order to go through that in, if you can kind of work through that in a good way. But what are some resources or things that you would suggest to listeners maybe that are in one of those stages and not quite to that acceptance yet?
I was kind of reflecting on that question a lot, of the how do you how do you deal with grief? What are things that you can do to help heal from it? And that's a really difficult question to answer because I mean, ultimately, it depends on the individual. Everybody's different, and that's one thing that makes human beings so beautiful is that we're so unique, and our experience of the world is so unique, and the way we experience grief is just as unique, and it depends on the person and how um when they're ready actually is what it's going to come down to. And it but we can help guide them through that and support them and offer people that help to kind of process through it. But I guess one of the main ways I can say has helped me a lot with dealing with grief is just talking about it, and helping people um by listening to them. I have a this brings to mind a book right now that I'm reading called Toxic Positivity.
Oh, I
And
love that.
and it's funny because it's like we are all taught to when somebody is coming to us for help, or they're crying, or they're grieving, or they're experiencing a difficult time in their life, that we tell them, oh, cheer up, everything's going to be okay.
Mm,
Or well, look at the bright side of things. Or well, at least you have this going for you. But we don't realize, we're sincerely trying to help somebody, but we don't realize that this individual is coming to us because they want to be validated
mhm,
by, they want their feelings validated, that they're experiencing something very difficult. They may not want you to fix them or fix their problem, but they at least want to be heard.
mhm.
And when we do that to them, it shuts them down.
Kind of dismisses
And
those feelings.
exactly, and it dismisses their whole experience of it. And it confuses them, like,
Mm,
okay, am I overreacting to this, or am I not responding the way I should be? And it makes them question themselves, whereas we should be supporting them in a different way and just listen to them and say, hey, how can I help you? What can I do to help you? Because sometimes we can be doing too much and offering support that they may not even want from us, and we can say, what is it that I can do for you in this? Whether it's um, come do my laundry because I can't even get off the couch today to
mhm,
move. I'm so upset. Or is it just stay away from me and give me
mhm,
some space? I need some quiet time with nobody bothering me,
mhm,
and maybe that means you will pick up their kids and take them to the park for a couple
mhm.
hours so they can just have some alone time, things like that. But I think it's for the person, the individual experiencing it, is just talk about it. Try as best as you can, try to find a way to talk about it. And another thing that for me that really helped a lot is prayer.
Mhm.
When I felt like there wasn't anybody who could understand what I was going through, or didn't feel like, you know, just talking to anybody. It's that prayer, and that's something that's also a beautiful thing that's given to us individually, is that we have that ability to communicate with our higher power, whatever that looks like, whatever it looks like to the individual. If it's Tinkashila, if it's God, if it's Buddha, if it's whatever,
Right.
their higher power is, to pray and talk about it, and that gives us that um, ability to release it in that way.
Yeah, I never really thought about that before. That of course, talking about it with people on this earth is always a good thing because I think the more that you can verbalize those emotions and what you're experiencing and how you're responding to that is going to be good in the long term. But yeah, prayer is just talking to whoever your higher power is.
Hmm.
And of course, I mean, there's research out there. Here I go with research, but
No, that's fine.
that's what I do. But
Yeah.
there's research out there that will show, people that pray are healthier.
Mhm.
That um, it's not only mentally, like of course, if you are engaging and thinking about positive things for other people and for yourself, and asking for help when needed. That helps you mentally, but also physically. You
Mhm.
can, if you have a stronger spiritual connection, there's a lot of physical health things that come with that. So, um, I also was thinking about, I've heard before when somebody's crying, or whether it's grief or like my kid fell down and skinned his knee, um, to not offer that Kleenex box so quickly.
Mhm.
And, I think that's just another go-to. Like it's just uncomfortable and like what do I do and how can I help and how can I respond? It's just a natural response to like grab the Kleenex box. So here you're crying. Let's
Yeah.
wipe your tears. But it's also like subconsciously communicating to them that it's not okay to cry.
Right. Yep. And that was something I was gonna point out also, is that sometimes they just need to cry, and that's those emotions are given to us for a reason. The ability and that ability to cry and to be sad. It's a very powerful emotion because it experiencing it is really difficult, but once you allow yourself to experience it and let it all out, then it may not be completely gone, but it becomes a little bit easier to endure.
Hmm. So that tissue might not be always the
Yeah.
go-to. I mean, of course, there's a time and a place, but
Hmm.
just allowing them to feel those feelings because
Yeah.
they're there for a reason, like you said. Um, so thinking about healing, I mean, I think that there's a journey that people that have grief go through, but I think sometimes we get these unexpected triggers of we're doing really well, we've had you know um, moved into that acceptance phase and are going about our daily lives, and then all of a sudden, bam, like something just totally unexpected triggers you, and you're right back into that grief. Can you talk a little bit about like identifying the triggers and maybe how to deal with them when sudden things come up like that?
Oh yeah. I think triggers are very powerful, and grief is very powerful in that way, is that in a way it becomes a part of us. It does. It becomes a huge part of who we are. You know, one person that was really a big significant loss in my life was the loss of my grandmother, and because she took that role of my mother, and I spent a lot of time with her at my grandma's house, and we cooked a lot together in her kitchen, and when she had passed away, I was living in South Dakota and she was still out in California. And I was, when I heard that she passed away, I was just kind of going through my grief process here and kind of got okay and was going on about it with my life. And then it wasn't till about 10 years later, I went back to my grandma's house in Los Angeles and got to go visit my family.
Hmm.
And I walked in the house, and like instantly the smell of that kitchen just
Hmm.
hit me. And it was just like, holy smokes, like something just reached down into my chest and just ripped my heart out. And it was just that pain again come right back. And I just cried, and it just comes over you like you can't control it at all. But it's that grief. And, you know, for me at that moment, I needed to cry,
Hmm.
and I cried. But after I got done, I was happy
Hmm.
because I was back there for that moment, and I was there. And in my grandma's house, I felt like that kid again.
Yeah.
And it was really good to be back there. And it was like, well, even though she's not physically here anymore, in a way, I could still smell
Hmm.
a part of her there, and that was comforting to me. And so that is something that, helped me deal with that. But there's things that we're going to experience for everybody, whether it's grief associated with a certain type of abuse, and there's going to be maybe a smell of a cologne or a
Hmm.
song
Hmm.
or something that we see that will trigger that negative response. You have to really have an awareness of yourself, and I think for a lot of people, there's some that don't have it as strong as others. But again, I think what really helps is to resort to that prayer, and just to maybe take a moment to breathe and think about it, and if it's that powerful, then to find someone to talk to about
Hmm.
it and to kind of share that experience with.
Yeah, definitely. And that could be, like you said, your higher power. That could
Hmm.
be somebody that cares about you that will let
Yeah.
you vent and listen.
Hmm.
Um, but it also makes me think about like counseling services. So
Right.
at Wakpawa Behavioral Health, there's obviously some trained professionals
Hmm.
that you can sign up with? Is there any services or features that you want to share with anybody that maybe is looking for more like professional support?
Yep, certainly. But one of the things that I really am really proud of with Bakbawash Day is that we have an amazing mental wellness program, and that we have providers there that have the ability to work with individuals that are experiencing things like grief, traumatic experiences. People think of Bakbawash Day and they automatically think, well, substance abuse treatment,
Mm.
alcohol and drug treatment, but there's not. Those go hand in hand with the mental health component of it. But for those that don't need the treatment and just want to have some counseling or somebody to talk to, there are safe, that is a safe area for individuals to come and to be able to do that without having to be referred by anybody. If
Okay.
I'm upset and you know what, man, I think I need to see a counselor about these things, about my grief. Maybe it's so bad that I might think that I might need some med management or
Hmm.
something,
Right.
and they have the ability to come into the office and to make that appointment to have that time set up for them.
Okay.
And our schedules are very flexible and we do have availability. I know a lot of times people think, they don't have time and they're going to schedule me for a month out, but no, we do have availability to be able to accommodate.
That's great to
Yeah.
hear. For anyone that's just joining in, this is Missouri Breaks, and we're doing our weekly variety show on public health topics. And I'm joined by Michelle West. I'm sorry, from Wakpawa Behavioral Health. So far, we've talked about what is grief. That it's any experience, not just death, but
Mhm.
any experience that you've lost something and have emotions from that. We've talked about, those sources of grief could be a divorce or um, a death, of course, that there's a lot of different, you can't define, what that grief is. It's individual. We've talked about signs and symptoms of just kind of a change from baseline, maybe, anger, lashing out, depression, withdrawing. And then, of course, the grieving process, how to deal with grief. So we've covered a lot of topics so far, but I think one thing unique to our community is that there's a lot of cultural beliefs and practices in the Lakota culture that tie in with grief. And is that something that you personally or like with Wakpawa have experience with or would like to talk with our community about?
Yes, most definitely. Speaking from a Wakbawash standpoint, uh, that's one of the things that makes our program so unique and amazing is the that it gives our community members the ability to come through if they want to speak to somebody and they want to take a cultural approach to healing, that we're able to provide resources for that and to help them to be able to utilize that avenue as a way of dealing with their grief, whether it's talking to a spiritual person, getting some advice, from them, guiding people if they're wanting to go to NEPs or utilize that type of a, way to get in their grief addressed. We're able to do that. Um, we do have a lodge at one of our transitional living houses, the NEP, and it's all about prayer, and that's one of the good things that we're able to offer to our people, and just listening to them to what they want to do, not
Hmm.
us trying to say, well, this is what we have and you need to do this. It's sitting down with them and saying, okay, what is it that you're wanting to do with it, and kind of letting them let us know what they are
Hmm. They
needing
get
with
to
that.
lead. That's
Yep,
great.
that they get to take the lead with that because we don't ever want to impose that on anybody. um, Personally, um, I think that some of the beliefs that tie in with grief is the nagi kichopi, or the calling back your spirit.
Mhm.
Because whenever we experience any type of trauma, grief, abuse, or anything like that, it in our culture, it our spirit, it's so impactful that it causes our spirit to leave us for a minute, and we wander, and that's why we do things that are kind of out of sort or out of character is because our spirits are so confused and impacted by the experience. And so they do that nagi kichopi, which is that calling back the spirit. I know my husband tells a story to me sometimes about whenever he was a little boy that they'd be out playing in the creeks and stuff, and they would come back at the end of the day, and that their unchi, their grandma, would stand at the door and call their names,
Mm,
call their names 4 times to they're bringing calling their spirit back, because when you're outside, you go amongst the people, you go amongst different individuals that are going through different things, and certain things can carry negative spirits or negative things around that can stick onto you.
mhm,
And so that's something personally that I do once in a while is I'll call my spirit back,
mhm,
whether I'm in Inipi doing it, or even if I'm just sitting by myself in my office or outside or something. I don't have to scream it out loud, but I can say my Lakota name 4 times. So if you have a Lakota name, say it 4 times, or even just your own name. That's I know not all of us are fluent Lakota language speakers. Not all of us have Lakota names, but that doesn't mean that our creator doesn't know who we are.
mhm.
And so that's a good thing that helps with that. Smudging,
Yeah, definitely.
praying, you know, that makes a big difference.
Yeah. Um, I, when you were talking earlier about the medicine wheel and the good grief model of the grieving process, going from what were the four again?
Going in, or the four of the
Directions.
directions.
Yep.
The first would be like if you're moving clockwise through that model, the initial denial stage of it, the anger, depression, and acceptance.
Okay.
You
And
know,
what that made me think of is, the um, traditional giveaways
hmm
that, on the when somebody passes away, we have the funeral services, the celebration of life, and then a year later we come back and do the giveaways, and that's kind of the time to get to that acceptance, maybe. And of
hmm
course, you can't prescript that or prescribe, that, well, that has to be done in a year. Obviously, people move through that on their own time frames, but that's what made me think of, is that, that giveaway is kind of trying to encourage us to get to that acceptance phase.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. And then the one that I'm less familiar with is wiping of the tears. That has some grief processes, I guess, that it can be used for. Correct?
Right. So, every Tioshbai has their different way that they practice that ceremony, and the different ceremonies overall. And so, what the way I will explain it is probably going to sound a lot different from what another Tioshbai or
Mm-hmm.
another family might practice. And that's okay. I'm very respectful to everybody's understanding of it and the way they do it. And so the way I've seen it done within our Tioshbai and our family was that after that year, then we would do the wiping of the tears ceremony a year after the death, and and doing that ceremony and kind of moving through it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So we've gone through so much already. Again, this was Ray with Missouri Breaks on our Public Health Weekly Variety Show, and I've got Michelle West with me from Wakpawashi Behavioral Health. For anybody maybe that joined late or is just joining, what is the big takeaways on grief that you want to really stick with folks?
I guess the biggest thing I want people to take away from it is just that there is no right or wrong way. We are all individual, we're all unique, we're all going to experience it the way we experience it. And that prayer helps a lot. It does. And to talk to people,
Mm-hmm.
open up and talk, and that's going to be the biggest thing is that, and to listen to those too, always to be a good relative and to listen helps people a lot.
Mm-hmm. And not be so quick to say, it's
Yeah.
okay, or you're better off,
Yeah.
or
And
to
here's a tissue.
right.
Stop crying. Cowgirl up. That's not the best thing to do sometimes.
Right. Yep. Just be a listening ear. Absolutely. Well, any final words you want to share?
Um, No, again, I would just like to say thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here today.
Absolutely. This has been really helpful even for me to hear. So I guess we'll wrap up with that and we'll be back next week. Oh, one more thought.
I would like to say one thing. There was something a while back that was shared with me in EPA, and I will share that really quickly with you guys. An individual that came in and talked about the loss of his wife said something that really stuck with me and my husband. And what he said is grief is love with no place that has no place to go.
Mm.
And the love that they shared with that individual, because they left, it's gone. They're like, what if this person is gone? Well, you take that love and you share it and you put it into something else, something that you love, whether it's your community, whether it's something that you really enjoy to give back. And that's a good way to think about it too.
I love
So,
that. I got goosebumps when you
yeah,
said that. Grief is love that has no place to go,
yeah,
but it does have a place if you
it
just
does.
redirect it
Yeah,
to something else good in your life.
yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. And we will be back with another public health topic next week.